What are you doing in that jacket? Did you steal it?
I wore this uniform before you even knew how to salute.
Ma'am, I didn't realize who you were. My apologies.
A veteran's jacket was mocked as old until a general recognized the patch and froze. The young lieutenant snickered as they pointed at the worn military jacket, calling it thrift store garbage, worn by someone pretending to be a veteran. But when General Maxwell caught sight of the faded patch outline on Eleanor's sleeve and recognized the ghost insignia of the most classified unit in military history, his stunned salute would expose a decades-old cover-up that had buried America's greatest heroes in shameful secrecy. The Fort Bragg commissary bustled with the controlled chaos of military life on a Tuesday afternoon, fluorescent lights humming overhead as soldiers and their families navigated aisles stocked with everything from tactical gear to breakfast cereal. The familiar sounds of shopping carts rolling across linoleum floors mixed with the steady murmur of conversations in multiple languages, creating the international atmosphere that characterized America's largest military installation. Outside the windows, olive-drab vehicles moved steadily along base roads, while helicopters practiced maneuvers in the distance, their rotor wash visible as heat shimmers in the North Carolina humidity that made even air-conditioned spaces feel slightly oppressive during the summer months. Eleanor Vance moved through the commissary with the measured steps of someone who had learned to conserve energy for battles that truly mattered. Her 52-year-old frame carrying itself with military bearing despite the civilian clothes that marked her as retired rather than active duty. The army jacket she wore over her simple blouse had seen better days, its olive-drab fabric faded from countless washings and its edges frayed from years of wear. But she kept it because it was the only tangible reminder of service that had defined her identity for over 3 decades. The jacket's most notable feature was barely visible, a faded outline on the left sleeve where a unit patch had once been sewn, removed so long ago that only the careful observer would notice the slight color variation that indicated something had been there. Eleanor's weathered hands, marked with scars that spoke of experiences beyond normal military service, selected items from the shelves with the efficiency of someone who planned meals around a modest pension and understood the value of every dollar spent. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail that emphasized features shaped by years of stress and responsibility that civilian life had never quite erased. The lines around her eyes reflected both the weight of secrets she could never share and the quiet dignity of someone who had served without recognition or gratitude, finding purpose in obscurity, because duty transcended personal recognition. Eleanor's presence in the commissary was routine and unremarkable, just another retiree managing her weekly shopping while trying to stretch limited resources to meet basic needs. The challenge that would define Eleanor's day began when Second Lieutenant Sterling and Foster, fresh from officer training and eager to demonstrate their authority, noticed her worn jacket and made assumptions about her status that would prove both cruel and catastrophically wrong. Their whispered comments about stolen valor and fake veterans grew louder as they watched her move through the store, building their confidence in accusations based solely on appearance rather than knowledge or evidence. The confrontation they were preparing to initiate would test not only Eleanor's patience and dignity, but also expose the dangerous gap between military tradition and contemporary attitudes about service sacrifice and the respect owed to those who had fought America's most secret battles. Eleanor's decision to continue her shopping, despite the increasingly audible comments from the two young officers, represented a choice between confrontation and avoidance that had characterized her entire post-military life. Her classified service record meant she couldn't defend herself with traditional proof of military service, while her training in operational security prevented her from revealing details that might validate her credentials, but would also compromise national security operations that remained active decades later. The opportunity for confrontation crystallized when Eleanor approached the checkout counter and attempted to use her military ID for the veteran's discount that represented one of the few tangible benefits of her service. The cashier's computer system showed an error message indicating that her records were classified beyond the clearance level of base personnel, creating the perfect opening for Sterling and Foster to publicly challenge her legitimacy. Their decision to escalate from private mockery to public accusation was motivated by their assumption that Eleanor was a fraud who could be easily exposed and humiliated, providing them with an opportunity to demonstrate their commitment to military values while establishing their authority over someone they perceived as vulnerable. The confrontation they initiated would prove to be a catastrophic miscalculation that would expose their own ignorance while potentially revealing state secrets that had been buried for reasons beyond their understanding. Eleanor's choice to remain calm and dignified in the face of their accusations reflected both her military training and her understanding that losing control would only validate their assumptions while potentially compromising security protocols that protected other classified personnel. Eleanor's strategy for managing the confrontation required balancing multiple competing objectives, maintaining her operational security, preserving her personal dignity, and avoiding escalation that might attract attention from base security or media personnel who could transform a local incident into a national controversy. Her approach involved providing minimal information while relying on the natural authority that came from decades of military experience and leadership. The plan required careful calibration between appearing cooperative enough to avoid arrest while remaining vague enough to protect classified information that could endanger ongoing operations or expose the identities of personnel who remained active in sensitive positions. Eleanor's training had taught her to assess threats and respond proportionally, recognizing that Sterling and Foster represented more of an annoyance than a genuine security risk. Her strategy also involved subtly appealing to the senior NCOs and experienced personnel who were observing the confrontation, trusting that their greater experience would help them recognize inconsistencies in the accusations being made against her. The presence of Master Sergeant Williams and Sergeant Major Rodriguez, both of whom had decades of experience working with classified personnel, provided potential allies who might intervene if the situation escalated beyond verbal harassment. Most importantly, Eleanor's plan required maintaining the kind of professional composure that would either discourage further confrontation or create enough doubt about the accusations to prevent them from gaining traction among the witnesses who were watching the incident unfold. Eleanor's first attempt to defuse the situation involved politely explaining that her records were classified and providing the basic information that she was authorized to share with base personnel who had appropriate clearance levels. Her calm demeanor and familiarity with military terminology should have been sufficient to convince reasonable people that her service was legitimate. But Sterling and Foster had already committed to their narrative and were unwilling to consider evidence that contradicted their assumptions. The failure of rational explanation led Eleanor to appeal directly to the senior NCOs who were observing the confrontation, trusting that their experience would help them recognize the signs of someone who had served in specialized units where classification was necessary for operational security. Master Sergeant Williams's subtle nod of recognition provided some validation, but he was constrained by his own limitations in dealing with classified personnel matters. Eleanor's attempt to simply complete her transaction and leave was blocked by Foster's decision to physically position himself between her and the exit, escalating the confrontation from verbal harassment to potential assault, while creating a scene that was attracting attention from other customers and base personnel. The situation was moving beyond her ability to control through diplomacy and restraint, requiring her to consider more assertive responses that might compromise her security protocols while protecting her immediate safety. The escalation continued when Foster made the fateful decision to record Eleanor's exposure on his smartphone, planning to post the confrontation on social media as evidence of his vigilance in protecting military honor from fraudulent claims. His live stream attracted immediate attention from viewers who began sharing the video without understanding the context or considering the possibility that their assumptions might be wrong. Eleanor's military training kicked in as she recognized that the situation had moved beyond simple harassment into potential intelligence compromise, with her image and voice being broadcast to unknown audiences who might include hostile actors with sophisticated facial recognition capabilities. Her response required balancing immediate security concerns with longer-term implications for both her safety and ongoing classified operations. The presence of other customers, including military families with children, added complexity to Eleanor's decision-making process, as she considered responses that might escalate the physical confrontation while traumatizing innocent bystanders. Her protective instincts extended beyond her own security to include the welfare of people who had become unwilling witnesses to a situation that was spiraling beyond anyone's control. Master Sergeant Williams' decision to quietly alert base security represented the first intervention by someone with enough experience to recognize that the confrontation involved factors beyond the obvious, though his ability to act was limited by protocols that prevented him from accessing classified personnel information or making definitive statements about Eleanor's background. The viral spread of Foster's video attracted attention from multiple audiences, including veterans advocacy groups, who began investigating Eleanor's background. Military personnel who recognized inconsistencies in the accusations being made against her, and media outlets that sensed a developing story about military culture and veterans' treatment. The online response was immediate and polarized, with some viewers supporting the young officer's actions, while others questioned their judgment and professionalism. Among the most significant responses came from retired personnel who had served in classified units and recognized subtle indicators in Eleanor's demeanor and responses that suggested her claims were legitimate. Their comments on social media platforms began shifting public opinion while also attracting attention from current intelligence personnel who understood the potential security implications of the incident. The Pentagon's Public Affairs Office became aware of the situation within hours of the video's initial posting, triggering internal reviews to determine whether classified personnel or operations had been compromised by the unauthorized filming and broadcast of the confrontation. Their investigation would ultimately lead to discoveries that would transform the incident from a simple case of harassment into a national security review. Local news stations picked up the story as an example of tensions between different generations of military personnel, though their initial reporting failed to capture the deeper issues involved in the confrontation or the possibility that Eleanor's service record contained information that was classified for legitimate national security reasons. The breakthrough came when Sergeant Major Rodriguez, one of the most senior enlisted personnel on the base, noticed the faded outline of a unit patch on Eleanor's jacket and recognized it as potentially belonging to a unit that existed only in rumors and classified briefings that he had been privileged to attend during his 30-year career. His understanding of special operations security protocols made him realize that Eleanor might be exactly who she claimed to be, but operating under classification levels that prevented normal verification. Rodriguez's decision to discreetly contact his superiors about the potential security implications of the incident triggered a chain of communications that reached the highest levels of military command within hours. His experience with classified personnel and operations gave him the credibility necessary to ensure that his concerns were taken seriously by officers who had the authority to investigate further. The investigation that followed revealed that Eleanor's service record was indeed classified at levels that required special authorization to access, confirming Rodriguez's suspicions, while also explaining why the commissary's computer system had been unable to verify her military status. The discovery created urgent questions about how to resolve the public controversy while protecting ongoing security operations that might be compromised by revealing details about Eleanor's background. The involvement of senior military leadership in what had begun as a routine shopping trip transformed the incident into a case study in the intersection between operational security military culture and the treatment of veterans whose service couldn't be publicly acknowledged. Eleanor's preparation for what she anticipated would be a formal investigation involved reviewing her legal options while considering the potential consequences of either defending herself publicly or continuing to maintain the operational security that had protected her and others for decades. Her decision-making process required balancing personal vindication against national security concerns that extended far beyond her individual situation. The military leadership's preparation for addressing the incident required coordination between multiple agencies and departments, including intelligence services that had operational interests in maintaining Eleanor's cover, and public affairs personnel who needed to manage the media attention that the viral video had generated. Their response would need to address the immediate controversy while protecting longer-term security interests. Sterling and Foster found themselves under investigation for their role in potentially compromising classified personnel, with their actions being reviewed by both military justice personnel and intelligence security specialists, who were concerned about the precedent their behavior might set for future incidents involving undercover or classified military personnel. The preparation also involved assessing the broader implications for military culture and the treatment of veterans whose service couldn't be publicly acknowledged. recognizing that Eleanor's case represented thousands of other personnel whose sacrifices had been hidden by classification requirements that served important security purposes but created personal and social costs that had never been adequately addressed. The crisis reached its peak when General Robert Maxwell, a four-star general with access to the highest levels of classified information, made an unscheduled visit to the commissary as part of his inspection tour of base facilities. His presence transformed what had been a local incident into a moment of potential national significance, as his recognition of Eleanor would either validate her claims or expose her as a fraud with access to information that should have been impossible for civilians to obtain. Maxwell's first glimpse of Eleanor triggered memories that he had spent decades trying to suppress, recollections of operations so classified that he had never been able to discuss them with anyone outside the small circle of personnel who had been directly involved. The unit patch outline on her jacket corresponded to insignia that officially had never existed, belonging to operations that had been erased from military records for reasons that involved national security at the highest levels. The general's immediate recognition of Eleanor was complicated by his own role in the classification decisions that had hidden her service from public view, creating a personal and professional crisis that required him to choose between protecting state secrets and honoring the service of someone who had sacrificed recognition for security. His decision would determine not only Eleanor's fate, but also set precedents for how the military treated classified personnel whose contributions couldn't be publicly acknowledged. The presence of media personnel and social media documentation meant that Maxwell's response would be witnessed by national audiences, creating pressure for decisions that balanced transparency with security, while addressing growing public interest in military accountability and veterans' treatment. The decisive moment arrived when General Maxwell approached Eleanor directly, his four-star rank, creating a silence that spread throughout the commissary as customers and personnel recognized that they were witnessing something unprecedented. His careful examination of the faded patch outline on her jacket was followed by a recognition that was visible in his expression, transforming from professional interest to profound respect and what appeared to be personal remorse. "Captain Vance," Maxwell said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of decades of suppressed knowledge and classified operations that had shaped American security policy in ways the public could never know. "It's been too long." His use of Eleanor's rank and name confirmed her military identity, while also revealing that her service had been significant enough to be remembered by one of the Army's most senior officers. The general's decision to render a formal military salute to Eleanor in full view of the assembled crowd created a moment of profound recognition that transcended the previous accusations and harassment. His gesture communicated not only respect for her service, but also acknowledgement that the classification of her record had been a disservice to someone who had earned public recognition for extraordinary contributions to national security. Eleanor's response to Maxwell's salute was immediate and instinctive, her return salute demonstrating the military bearing that her critics had failed to recognize despite its obvious presence in her posture and demeanor. The exchange between the four-star general and the woman in the faded jacket created a powerful visual representation of military hierarchy and respect that silenced every critic and observer in the commissary. The moment also represented Maxwell's decision to prioritize honoring military service over maintaining the classification protocols that had protected state secrets at the cost of individual recognition, setting the stage for revelations that would change military policy and veterans affairs for decades to come. 2. Maxwell's public acknowledgement of Eleanor's service created immediate chaos as the implications of his recognition rippled through the assembled crowd and online audiences who were witnessing the confrontation through continued social media streaming. The general's obvious respect for someone who had been accused of fraud just minutes earlier forced everyone present to reassess their assumptions while creating questions about the classification systems that had hidden her service. The transformation was immediate and dramatic, with Sterling and Foster realizing that their accusations had been directed at someone whose service had been recognized by the Army's senior leadership, potentially ending their military careers before they had truly begun. Their attempts to retreat from their previous statements were complicated by the video evidence of their harassment and the public nature of their accusations. Eleanor's own reaction to being publicly acknowledged was complex, involving relief at finally being recognized for her service, balanced against concern about the security implications of revealing her identity and background. Her training had prepared her for the possibility that her cover might be blown, but the emotional impact of recognition after decades of anonymity was overwhelming. The incident had evolved from a simple case of harassment into a national conversation about military classification veterans' treatment and the balance between security and recognition that would influence policy decisions for years to come. General Maxwell's decision to publicly acknowledge Eleanor's service required extensive coordination with Pentagon leadership intelligence agencies and legal counsel to determine how much classified information could be revealed without compromising ongoing operations or national security interests. His preparation involved reviewing decades-old files and consulting with current officials who had knowledge of the programs that Eleanor had participated in during her active duty service. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Eleanor's contributions to national security, including her role in preventing terrorist attacks that could have killed thousands of American civilians, and her leadership of classified operations that had eliminated threats to critical infrastructure and military installations. Her service record showed decorations and commendations that had never been publicly acknowledged due to classification requirements that protected both operational security and the identities of personnel involved. Eleanor's preparation for what she understood would be a fundamental change in her circumstances involved processing emotions that had been suppressed for decades while considering how to handle public attention that could compromise her privacy and security. Her decision to cooperate with the declassification process was motivated by her desire to honor fallen comrades whose sacrifices had never been acknowledged, rather than by personal desires for recognition or vindication. The military's preparation also involved developing protocols for handling similar cases in the future, recognizing that Eleanor's situation represented broader issues with the treatment of classified personnel and the balance between security requirements and the recognition that veterans deserved for their service. Despite General Maxwell's recognition and the military's commitment to addressing her case, Eleanor struggled with doubts about whether revealing her service record was worth the potential security risks and personal costs that might result from public attention. Her decades of operational security training had ingrained habits of secrecy and anonymity that were difficult to overcome even when official policy supported transparency. The concern that declassifying her record might compromise ongoing operations or endanger personnel who had worked with her during classified missions created ethical dilemmas that extended beyond her personal situation. Eleanor's sense of responsibility to others who had served in similar capacities made her cautious about accepting recognition that might create precedents with unintended consequences. Her doubts were balanced against the recognition that her public vindication might help other veterans who had faced similar challenges in proving their service due to classification requirements, potentially improving the treatment of an entire category of military personnel whose contributions had been hidden by necessary but problematic security protocols. The formal ceremony to declassify and honor Eleanor's service took place 3 months later in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, attended by senior military leadership, intelligence officials, and family members of the soldiers who had served alongside her in classified operations. The pressure was intensified by media coverage that had transformed her story into a national symbol of military sacrifice and the complex relationship between security requirements and public recognition of service. Eleanor's presence at the ceremony required extensive security measures due to her continued involvement in classified programs and the potential threats that public recognition might create for someone whose identity had been protected for decades. Her decision to participate despite these risks reflected her commitment to honoring fallen comrades whose families had never been told the truth about their loved one's service and sacrifice. The ceremony represented not just personal recognition for Eleanor, but also a broader acknowledgement by military leadership that classification policies had sometimes failed to balance security requirements with the recognition and support that veterans deserved for their contributions to national defense. The complexity of Eleanor's case created challenges for military officials who needed to balance declassification with ongoing security requirements that protected current operations and personnel. The process of determining which aspects of her service could be publicly acknowledged while maintaining essential classifications required coordination between multiple agencies and extensive legal review. Eleanor's own emotional preparation for public recognition was complicated by survivor's guilt related to comrades who had died during classified operations and whose families would finally learn the truth about their loved one's service. The weight of representing not just her own experiences, but also the sacrifices of others who could never speak for themselves created pressure that extended far beyond personal recognition. The presence of family members who were learning about their loved one's classified service for the first time added emotional complexity to the ceremony. As years of secrecy and uncertainty were finally resolved through official acknowledgement of service that had been hidden by classification requirements that served important security purposes but created personal costs that had never been adequately addressed. The climactic moment came when General Maxwell personally presented Eleanor with the Distinguished Service Cross Silver Star and 3 Purple Hearts that had been classified for over 2 decades, along with recognition for her fallen teammates whose names were finally added to official military records and memorial walls. The presentation was witnessed by their families, who had spent years wondering about the circumstances of their loved ones' deaths and the significance of their service. The ceremony also included the official restoration of Eleanor's military record, with her rank and service history being updated to reflect her actual contributions, rather than the limited information that had been available through normal channels. The correction of her record ensured that she would receive the full military benefits and recognition that her service had earned, including health care and retirement benefits that had been reduced due to classification errors. Most significantly, the ceremony established new protocols for honoring classified service while maintaining necessary security protections, ensuring that future veterans would not face the same challenges that Eleanor had endured in proving their service and receiving appropriate recognition. The policy changes represented a fundamental shift in how the military balanced security requirements with its obligations to honor and support personnel who had served in classified capacities. Eleanor's victory was completed when she was offered a new position as an advisor to military leadership on issues related to classified personnel and veterans affairs, providing her with an opportunity to ensure that others would not face the same challenges she had endured while serving her country in new ways that honored her experience and expertise. The transformation of Sterling and Foster, who had initiated the confrontation that led to Eleanor's recognition, into advocates for respectful treatment of all veterans, demonstrated the educational value of her story and its impact on military culture. Their public apologies and subsequent careers dedicated to veterans affairs showed how personal growth could emerge from acknowledged mistakes. The lasting impact of Eleanor's recognition was measured not just in her personal vindication, but in the policy changes that improved treatment for thousands of other veterans whose service had been classified, ensuring that security requirements would no longer prevent appropriate recognition and support for those who had sacrificed for their country in ways that could not be publicly acknowledged. The immediate aftermath of Eleanor's recognition triggered comprehensive reviews of military classification policies and veterans benefits programs, leading to reforms that ensured classified service would no longer prevent appropriate recognition and support for personnel who had served in sensitive capacities. Her case became a catalyst for legislative changes that improved healthcare, disability benefits, and family support programs for veterans whose service couldn't be publicly acknowledged. Sterling and Foster faced military justice proceedings for their harassment of classified personnel, with their case establishing precedents for professional conduct and respect for veterans, regardless of their ability to prove their service through conventional documentation. Their subsequent rehabilitation and dedication to veterans advocacy demonstrated the educational value of accountability and personal growth following acknowledged mistakes. The Pentagon established new protocols for handling cases involving classified personnel, ensuring that future veterans would have access to appropriate verification systems that could confirm their service without compromising operational security. Eleanor's experience became a case study in military academies and leadership training programs, teaching future officers about the importance of respect, humility, and careful judgment when evaluating others' claims and backgrounds. Eleanor's story inspired the creation of nonprofit organizations dedicated to supporting veterans whose service had been classified, providing advocacy, legal assistance, and community connections for individuals who had struggled to access benefits and recognition due to security requirements. Her ongoing work as a military advisor helped develop policies that balanced legitimate security concerns with veterans' rights and needs. The incident also sparked broader conversations about military culture, respect for service members, and the importance of understanding that heroism often remained hidden due to classification requirements that served important national security purposes. Eleanor's example demonstrated that true service was measured by sacrifice and dedication, rather than public recognition or visible proof of accomplishments. Her advocacy work led to the establishment of memorial programs that honored classified service members who had died in the line of duty, ensuring that their families received appropriate recognition and support while maintaining necessary security protections. The programs provided closure for families who had waited decades to understand the significance of their loved one's service and sacrifice. 5 years later, Eleanor stood before a new class of military officers wearing her restored uniform with the decorations that had been hidden for decades, teaching them about leadership sacrifice and the importance of treating every person with dignity and respect. Her students included Sterling and Foster, now senior lieutenants, who had dedicated their careers to veterans advocacy and used their own mistakes as teaching examples. True honor, she told them, touching the restored Spectre Group patch on her sleeve, isn't about recognition or awards. It's about serving something greater than yourself, even when no one will ever know what you've done. Remember that the next time you're tempted to judge someone's service by appearances alone,